And we've got breaking news just into our newsroom. The union representing BC port workers have rejected a tentative deal agreement. The strike is now expected to resume today at 4:30 local time, so imminently. The CBC's Tanya Fletcher has the latest for us from Vancouver. So Tanya, what more do we know?
We're literally getting in details as we speak, Andrew, and you mentioned it at 4:30 local time. That's 5 minutes from now. The workers will be headed back to the picket line. So what we know is the union and the employer both confirmed the tentative agreement, as you mentioned, has fallen apart. The union members basically feel it didn't go far enough to protect their jobs now and in the future, given the contracting out situation that they were bargaining with at the beginning. Another big point was wages. They say, especially in light of the record profits that companies have been making. They say they are prepared to go back to the bargaining table tonight, and they will stay there as long as needed to make sure a deal is done, it's ratified, and it goes right on. But as we say, picket workers are headed back to the picket lines in 4 minutes. We do have a camera heading down there, so we'll have the very latest coming in momentarily from the local ports here.
And so, Tanya, just to give a little background, the strike, the 13-day strike ended on Thursday. There was a deal that the federal government kind of gave towards arbitration, right? And so 7,400 workers and billions of dollars in trade that just stopped. Have we heard anything from the federal government?
Yeah, so yes and no. We have heard a statement. It doesn't say much, though. I'll read it to you. It says the ratification processes are between the employer and the union. We do not comment on them. The minister will receive formal notice from the parties when the vote is complete, and the results will be made public shortly after. So that was earlier before this news really was confirmed and broke. So we do have further requests for comment from Ottawa, but so far the federal government hasn't said anything. Keep in mind, it was the federal government that really, I think the minister called it, Seamus O'Regan called it a forceful nudge, really pushed them towards this deal in the first place. It was about a week ago that his office announced that he would basically demanded that the mediator draft a deal that the minister would then look over, and then it would be presented to both sides. They did sign it in a tentative deal at the time, but now days later that has fallen apart before it was ratified. So as you mentioned, this really crippled BC's economy, Canada's economy as a whole, froze billions of dollars worth of cargo from moving in and out of the harbours, including Canada's busiest port, which is here in Vancouver. So as soon as we learn more details from either side or from the federal government, we'll bring you those when we have them.
Yeah, Tanya, thank you. And we're going to have much more on this breaking story throughout the hour. That was the CBC's Tanya Fletcher live in Vancouver. And we have more on the breaking news that we were just telling you about, and that is that the Port Workers Union has voted down the settlement that was reached between the union and the employer in the BC Port Workers strike that ended on Thursday. They have voted down the recommended terms of settlement that were provided by a federal mediator after the Labour Minister, Seamus O'Regan, gave, a nudge towards coming up with some kind of settlement. It was accepted, but now it has been voted down, and we're just getting a news release from the union, and this is what it says. The ILWU, Canada Longshoremen Caucus, has voted down the mediator's recommended terms of settlement. The caucus does not believe the recommendations had the ability to protect our jobs now or into the future. Our position since day one has been to protect our jurisdiction, and this position has not changed. With the record profits that the BCMEA's member companies have earned over the last few years, the employers have not addressed the cost of living issues that our workers have faced over the past couple of years, as all workers have. And the term of the collective agreement was given with today's uncertain time is far too long. We must be able to readdress the uncertainty in the world's financial markets for our members, and also going on to say that union members will be back on the picket line for a fair and negotiated collective agreement. And we are hearing that pickets have in fact gone up. As you know, as we were mentioning, there was a 13-day strike that did end on a Thursday with workers going back to work, but now that strike is back on. Crippled ports in British Columbia, Vancouver, the country's biggest port, and of course goods imports and exports going from Canada largely to Pacific nations. So for more on all of this, we're joined by Matthew Holmes. He is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So what do you make of the fact that this strike, after just, after a mediator settlement, just 4 or 5 days later, is back on?
Well, Andrew, very disappointed. Unfortunately, I don't know how surprised I am. Right out of the gate, we called for back to work legislation from the government. We didn't have the feeling that this would be struck in good faith, and the union today has proved that. And
so what do you mean by that? Why do you feel as though this was struck, this settlement was agreed upon, and then it fell apart?
Well, I can't speak to the details of that. I'm not at the table, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the union is either. So we really feel there's a lack of political leadership right now. We need to see the government and all parties agree to call the House back and force back to work legislation until the two parties can come together and figure this out, whether that's through binding arbitration or otherwise.
And why do you feel that way? Why do you feel as though there needs to be back to work legislation?
The economy just can't sustain this. It's $800 million a day. We're approaching $10 billion in disrupted trade. This will affect the Canadian GDP for months to come. It will disrupt employers. It will disrupt family businesses. It will be felt by consumers throughout the economy, throughout the country. It's 25 to 30% of our national trade flows through these West Coast ports.
What do you make of the argument that the union appears to be making tonight, and that is that the settlement just wasn't fair, given, in their words, the record profits that many of the members have been, the companies have earned over the last few years, that they're not kind of addressing cost of living concerns, that they're not addressing concerns around contracting out work?
Well, unfortunately, the union membership didn't get a chance to vote on this. The caucus leadership took that from them. So the questions you're raising would be best answered by the union membership. I think we have to respect that the federal mediator listened to both sides, was at the table with both sides, provided recommendations to both sides, which were agreed to, move toward this agreement, which has now been pulled off the table by the union side. So I think we have to respect that the process to date hasn't resulted in a resolution to this. The details of the agreement, I don't know. Those haven't been publicly released. I do know from the employer side that they state these were well and above the average of 10% increase over the past 3 years that they received on wages. I don't know the other details at this point.
And can you tell us more about the kind of impact that you think this could have on the Canadian economy going forward? So this will be day 14, 13 days, and now another day added on.
Well, it's already having an impact. It's we've heard of lumber operations that have made temporary layoffs. We've heard of severely disrupted trade, which is now being rerouted across the country to the Port of St. John. We've heard of approximately 12,000 truck shipments a week that aren't moving out of the port. We've heard of disrupted trade with our international partners who can't get the food or the fertilizer that they rely upon from Canada, and trade that's not coming into Canada that our trading partners are having to send elsewhere. So this will be inflationary, it will be costly, and at a certain point, the Canadian government needs to get this done.
So far, I mean, this may change, but the federal government has not indicated that they would impose back to work legislation. We don't know exactly how they will react now, but if there is not back to work legislation, do you fear that this could drag on and on?
Well, I'm certainly concerned to see it. The Port of Montreal strike in 2021 lasted about 10 to 12 days, including the time it took for the back to work legislation to work. That it's quite concerning that the first and third largest ports in the country are now implicated in this, as well as the other 28 other ports up along the West Coast. So this is considerably larger. It's questionable to us why the government is taking this long, why the other parties are not working collectively to address this for the Canadian population, for Canadian businesses. It's going to have a severe impact.
What kind of impact do you think it could have on consumers?
On consumers, it'll be a long tail. We'll see increased price volatility, lack of supplies of certain goods, delayed shipments, everything from cars through to fresh produce. And then, of course, what we're seeing through a lot of these ports are critical equipment for our manufacturing sector. So that'll just create ripple effects throughout the economy.
All right. Matthew Holmes, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
And we want to continue our coverage on this breaking news with Herb Pond. He is the mayor of Prince Rupert, BC, and he joins me now. Mayor, just thanks for talking to us. Just tell us about your reaction to the fact that this strike is now back on.
It's profoundly disappointing. I was picking up Facebook comments just not that long ago from members who were very eager to get back to work, who have felt the pinch of being away from the workplace, and they're profoundly disappointed.
They're profoundly disappointed because they weren't able to vote on this. We don't know the details of all of this, right? So what are you hearing?
Yeah, you know, people aren't really going into much detail. They're speaking at a level of just the worry of, you know, putting food on the table, having meaningful, productive time at work, getting back to enjoying all the relationships of the workplace. You know, I think there was a sense of having gone through the pain, and now life was going to get back to normal, and you know, to have it so close in front of you and then have it pulled back away is obviously disappointing.
Tell us about the impact on your community.
Oh, it's hard to describe, you know, just putting it in context, right? You know, Canada's other major ports, the first and second, well, first is Vancouver. It's in a community of 2.4 million people. Montreal, second port, largest port in Canada, 4.6 million people. And then in Prince Rupert, there's 12,000 of us. And employed in the port complex, not just longshoring, but in the other jobs, there's 2,000 or 3,000 people employed directly in the port complex jobs in the different terminals, and so when you take that and put it into a community where there's about 5,000 households, it means that every single household in this community, if there's not a neighbor on your left, it's a neighbor on your right, if it's not somebody in your own household. So it's felt. It's felt dramatically. There was a sense of celebration when there was a sense that people were going to be going back to work. And of course, now there's this letdown and the concern about, you know, where the pathway out is and how long that will take.
I mean, that's really something. I don't know whether everyone realizes that it is the Prince Rupert is the third largest port in the country. So go ahead, sorry.
Oh, it is. You know, it's out of proportion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you live in Vancouver or Montreal, you probably don't even know a longshore worker. in Rupert, there's one in every, you know, there's a family in every classroom, there's a family in every sports team, there's a family in every church group, whatever social group you're part of. It's intertwined completely with port workers and longshore workers in particular.
What do you know, I know we don't know all the details, but we're hearing from the union tonight that is basically saying, look, they're worried about contracting out. They're worried about this deal not matching concerns around rising cost of living, around volatility in financial markets. They're also saying that the employers, the members of the member companies, you know, they're making lots of profits, that there isn't the right balance there. What's your sense of that? Have you heard anything from members about that?
I'm smart enough not to get involved in in collective negotiations of which I'm not directly a party of, but I do have faith in the collective bargaining process. These things seem so traumatic in the moment, and there is no question. The impact on Canada's economy, the impact on the local Prince Rupert economy is massive, and it's of great concern for me, for those directly impacted families. But this too will pass. We will move through it in one fashion or another, and we're going to come out stronger the other side, certainly.
So just before I let you go, can you tell us, like, what has been the impact of having, a third of your residents who work at the port, just the impact that it's had on your community, the 13 days, and any kind of concerns you have that this could drag on? We don't know how long.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly, but people look at, there certainly seems to be a little more urgency in some of the real estate sales. There seems to be a little bit more urgency around the sale of recreational vehicles and those sorts of things. And one wonders whether it's impacting the local stores and the restaurants and everything else. You can't separate out wheat from chaff. It's hard to know precisely, but there is certainly an angst amongst everyone. Because when we go through this, we go through it together as a community. I hearken back always to the time when the pulp mill closed and we went through that downturn together as a community. It was the ILWU longshore workers that pulled us out of that with the opening of the container terminal. They literally saved Prince Rupert. And so we're here to embrace them as long as it takes to get through, and then Prince Rupert's going to get back to growing and nation building so that we become an important part of Canada's economy.
And you said you believe in the collective bargaining process, and so you're not calling for the federal government to recall Parliament and put in back to work legislation.
Yeah. People with much bigger titles than mine have to figure out where the balance lies between protecting the overall Canadian economy and intervening in a collective bargaining process. But I know a lot of the men and women who are involved in the bargaining on both sides, and they're reasonable people. They understand what's at stake, and I'm sure that a deal can be worked out that works for everybody.
Mayor, I hope you're right. I think everybody wants this to work out, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Thank you.